It started on a night when the rain didn't just fall, it seemed to seep into everything around me. The kind of rain that drenches your clothes within minutes. So heavy, it beats against the skin like 1,000 tiny hammers. I was on my way home from a late shift at the convenience store, the streets slick and reflective, the neon signs shimmering in the puddles. The air had that peculiar smell, wet asphalt mixed with something more metallic, almost like blood, though I knew it wasn't. Something about that night felt different. The kind of difference you can't quite name until later, when it lingers in your mind and twists itself into a memory you can't forget. I had always been drawn to storms, even as a kid. There was something about the chaos, the way everything else was drowned out by wind and water, that made me feel alive. That night, I should have been used to it. Yet, as I walked under the flickering streetlight, I realized I wasn't alone. I had this strange, sudden awareness of movement, of shapes shifting just at the edge of my vision, shadows that didn't belong to any object I could see. At first, I convinced myself it was my imagination, the rain playing tricks, reflections turning into something sinister. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. I could feel it watching me. Something that wasn't human. Something patient waiting for me to lower my guard. By the time I reached the narrow alley behind the laundromat, my jacket soaked through. I noticed that the alley was empty. Too empty. Normally, the alley smelled of wet trash. And sometimes, if I was unlucky, there'd be someone huddled there trying to avoid the rain. But this time, it was silent except for the rain, dripping from the roof gutters in a rhythmic, almost mocking pattern. I paused for a moment, the hair on the back of my neck standing up, and I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible sound, like someone dragging their fingers along the wall. I stopped breathing. The sound stopped. Then, a whisper. I couldn't make out the words, only the tone, a mixture of amusement and hunger that crawled under my skin. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I simply took a step forward, my boots splashing in the ankle-deep puddles, and kept moving toward the main street. The longer I stayed in that alley, the heavier the air became, thick with that metallic smell again, stronger now, more insistent. And then I saw it, a figure at the far end, half hidden by the rain, almost blending into the darkness. It was tall, impossibly thin, and it moved in a way that no human should. Jerky, like a puppet with broken strings. I froze. My chest tightened, my heart pounding like a drum. I told myself to keep walking, to act normal, to ignore it. But as I took another step, it tilted its head toward me, and I felt the gaze of those eyes, black as the void, drilling into me, stripping away every layer of my resolve. I tried to think rationally. It had to be someone in a costume, some prankster taking advantage of the storm. But then I realized, even if it was, It was no ordinary person. There was a fluidity to its movement, a silence that no human could achieve in a wet alley with puddles. The rain didn't touch it the way it touched me, didn't ripple around its form. It was as if the rain simply passed through it like it existed on a different plane entirely. My instinct screamed at me to run, but I was rooted to the spot. Every horror story I had ever read, every urban legend whispered in the safety of a dry room flashed through my mind. None of them had prepared me for this. And then it spoke, though its lips didn't move. The sound came directly into my head, a cold, hollow voice that resonated like it had come from somewhere deep underground. "You shouldn't be here." That was all, just 6 words. But the way they echoed in my skull made it impossible to ignore. I stumbled backward, splashing through the puddles, heart hammering, mind screaming for logic, for sense. But there was none. When I looked again, the figure had moved closer, though I hadn't seen it take a step. Each heartbeat was a countdown. Each second, a reminder that I was utterly exposed. I turned and ran. My feet slapped against the wet pavement, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Water spraying from each step. I didn't look back at first, only dared a glance when I reached the corner of Maple and Fifth. The street was empty, bathed in the dull glow of streetlights, rain bouncing off the asphalt. No figure, no shadow, just the rain, relentless and overwhelming. I stopped, chest heaving, trying to convince myself it had been a hallucination, a trick of the storm and exhaustion. Yet I knew it hadn't been. I could feel the presence lingering, somewhere behind, maybe in the storm itself, waiting for the next mistake. By the time I got home, dripping and shivering, the rain had slowed, the storm moving on, leaving only puddles and silence. I locked the door, bolted every latch, yet sleep didn't come. In the dead hours of the night, I could still hear it. The whispering, the soft dragging of something just beyond my vision, even in the safety of my room. And when morning came, the first thing I noticed was the puddles inside my boots, perfectly shaped, like footprints, though I had been the only one in them. Something had followed me home. I don't know what, and I still don't understand it, but I learned a lesson that night. The rain doesn't just cleanse. Sometimes it hides things, preserves them, lets them watch and wait until you think it's safe. Weeks later, the memory of that night still haunted me. I avoided the alley, avoided the storms as best I could, yet the feeling of eyes on me never left. I began to notice patterns, shadows moving where they shouldn't, reflections that lingered too long, the occasional whisper carried on the wind. My friends noticed I had grown tense, jumpy even. And when I tried to explain, they laughed it off. "Just nerves," they said. But deep down, I knew it wasn't nerves. It was something more, something patient and intelligent. A predator that used the rain as a cloak. I became fascinated with storms, researching legends, folklore, and accounts of the supernatural tied to thunderstorms and rain-soaked nights. The more I read, the more I realized how little I truly understood about what might be out there. I'll never forget the first time I saw it again, though it wasn't quite like before. Months later, during a heavy downpour, I was walking near the old train tracks, the storm relentless, water streaming down my face. I thought I saw it at first, a figure in the distance, partially obscured by sheets of rain. My heart stopped. The way it moved, the silence, the impossibility of it. There was no mistaking it. I felt a pull, a compulsion to acknowledge it, yet terror rooted me in place. It tilted its head and I could feel its gaze pierce through me, through the storm itself, and into the deepest parts of my mind. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone, leaving nothing but the sound of rain and the pounding of my own heartbeat. I tried to explain it to others. I tried rational means, shadows, imagination, coincidence. But each story I told only made them laugh, dismiss me, call me over-imaginative. That's the trick of things like this. They're real enough to convince you, subtle enough that others can't see them, leaving you isolated in your fear. I began keeping a journal of storms, of nights when the rain was different, when shadows lingered longer than they should, when whispers carried on the wind. I would write, hoping that documenting it would make it less real. But every entry only reaffirmed what I already knew. Some things exist outside of our understanding, outside of the normal, waiting in the rain, patient and eternal. I could feel it in my bones on certain nights. A presence I could neither name nor confront. And yet, I felt compelled to walk in the rain, to search for it, to understand it. The fear never left, but it became a strange companion, a reminder of my vulnerability, my smallness, and the vastness of what might be out there. And though I never saw it as clearly as I had that first night, the shadows, the whispers, the impossible movements of objects just out of place, all these small signs reminded me that the world is larger, stranger, and far more dangerous than most of us are willing to admit. The second story I want to share begins on a night when the rain wasn't just falling, it was screaming, each drop hitting the roof and windows like a drum of warning. I was staying with my cousin in the outskirts of a small town, the kind of place where street lights are few and far between, and shadows move like they have a life of their own. The evening had started innocently, just the two of us playing board games and laughing at memories from childhood, when the storm outside began to rage. We both noticed it first, the kind of storm that makes you aware of your heartbeat and the faint creaks of the house settling under the weight of the wind. But nothing could have prepared us for what came next. It was around 11 when I first sensed it. I had gotten up to pour a glass of water and noticed something strange through the kitchen window. At first, I thought it was a trick of the rain. A figure, tall, standing in the garden, completely still, drenched, and yet somehow untouched by the deluge. I froze, holding the glass in midair, pretending not to notice, as if by ignoring it, it might disappear. My cousin was in the living room, laughing at some ridiculous move I had made in the game, unaware. The figure did not move. It simply stood, watching. Even in the storm, I could feel the weight of its gaze, a pressure that pressed down on my chest and made every breath deliberate. I whispered to myself that it must be someone's prank. But no one lived close enough to do this, and the storm made it impossible to hear footsteps or voices. I stepped back, careful not to make a sound, and tried to convince myself to turn the light off and pretend I hadn't seen anything. But the figure moved slightly, and the subtle motion sent a shiver down my spine. Slowly, impossibly slowly, it lifted an arm. There was no face visible, no features discernible in the sheets of rain, but I could feel the intent behind the gesture. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't neutral. It was curious, assessing, almost playing with the idea of whether I would react. I remember gripping the counter so tightly, my knuckles went white. My mind screamed for reason, yet there was none that could fit the scenario. I wanted to run, to scream, but something heavier than fear held me in place, forcing me to watch, to wait, as if my paralysis was part of its design. Then, as abruptly as it appeared, the figure vanished. Not walked away, not hidden behind a tree. Simply gone. My heart hammered so loudly, I thought it would alert my cousin. I backed away from the window and called out, though my voice was unsteady. "Hey, did you see that?" My cousin turned, confused, asking what I meant. I waved vaguely toward the window. But when she looked, there was nothing. Just the garden drenched in rain, the soil dark and glistening. I tried to explain, fumbling for words, but I could see the skepticism in her eyes. Maybe she thought I was joking. Maybe she thought I was letting the storm get to me. Either way, I was alone in knowing what I had seen. Alone in the creeping awareness that the storm had something watching me. The next part of the night escalated without warning. I returned to the living room, trying to distract myself by watching TV. But the rain seemed louder now, more insistent, tapping against the walls in a rhythm almost like footsteps. I glanced at the window and noticed a reflection, faint but unmistakable. A shadow moving inside the house. Though my cousin and I were the only two present. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to make me freeze in place. My gaze locked on the corner where it should not have been. The sensation of being watched intensified. I could feel it in my skin, my hair standing on end as if the air itself carried its presence. I told my cousin I needed to check something outside, a feeble excuse to escape the living room and get fresh air. I stepped into the pouring rain, feeling it soak through my jacket immediately. The garden was empty, Not a single figure, not a single shadow. I laughed nervously at myself, trying to shake off the fear. Maybe it had been a reflection. Maybe it had been a trick of the storm. But then I felt it. Eyes on me. Not human eyes, something colder, something that penetrated beyond the wet darkness. It followed me, always just at the periphery of our vision, never close enough to identify, but close enough to make every step a test of courage and willpower. I began pacing, slow circles, trying to lure whatever it was into revealing itself, foolishly testing my fear. The air grew heavier with each step, the rain more relentless, and the shadows around me deepened. I could hear faint whispers now, words I couldn't comprehend, carried on the wind. It spoke directly to the mind, cold and deliberate, as if it knew the rhythm of my thoughts, responding to my fear in real time. I stopped moving, afraid to make the slightest noise. The whispers stopped immediately, leaving me in the crushing silence of the storm's aftermath, my chest heaving and my hands trembling. Then came the movement, slow and deliberate, across the garden. I didn't see a figure, only the way the rain fell differently in patches, as if the air itself was shifting, making a shape. It moved toward the side of the house, and I followed, compelled by a mix of terror and an irrational need to confront it. As I rounded the corner, I noticed prints in the mud. Not human, elongated with irregular spacing, almost as though something was slinking rather than walking. I bent down to examine them and felt a cold breeze wash over me, smelling faintly of earth and something metallic, like rusted iron. The prints ended abruptly at the edge of the porch. I stayed out there for what felt like hours, the storm unrelenting, hoping for a sign, any confirmation. But none came. I returned inside, soaked, shaking, and my cousin barely noticed the change in my demeanor. Sleep came eventually, but it was fractured, filled with dreams of rain-soaked figures, whispering voices, and shadows that lingered long after I opened my eyes. In the morning, everything appeared normal. The storm gone, the garden flooded with water reflecting sunlight. Yet I knew that night was not a hallucination. Something had been there, something intelligent, patient, and aware of my fear. Weeks passed, and I noticed patterns. Rain seemed to summon it, calling forth whatever entity had been watching me. I would catch glimpses in reflections, fleeting movements just beyond my peripheral vision, and sometimes I would hear faint whispers when no one else was home. The entity never attacked, never revealed itself fully, but it made its presence known, a constant reminder that the world has layers unseen, layers dangerous and alien. I researched local legends, storms, and folklore, but nothing perfectly explained what I experienced. The more I tried to rationalize, the more I realized that I couldn't. Some things simply exist, and rain has a way of concealing and revealing them simultaneously. By the time autumn arrived, I began documenting every rainy night, every shadow, every whisper, every strange reflection. It became a compulsion. Some nights, I would walk in the storm, searching for the sensation, for the proof, for the confrontation that might explain it all. Other nights, I would barricade myself inside, afraid of what I might find. But the pattern remained. Heavy rain brought with it a sense of being observed, a creeping dread that no light or human presence could dispel. I began to see it in places I had previously considered safe. Under bridges, in alleyways, even through the reflection of store windows. Wherever water pooled, wherever rain fell, the entity's presence lingered, patient and silent. The third story unfolded years later, long after I had convinced myself that whatever followed the rain belonged to a chapter of my life that had closed. I was older, more grounded, living alone in a small apartment near the edge of the city. The building was old, the kind that creaked and groaned even on calm nights. And during storms, it seemed to breathe. Rainwater would collect along the windowsills, forming slow, deliberate trails that caught the light from passing cars. I had grown used to the sound of rain by then, even welcomed it as background noise while I slept. That was my mistake. The night it happened, the rain began suddenly. A violent downpour that rattled the windows and drowned out every other sound. I had fallen asleep on the couch, the television casting shifting shadows across the walls. I woke to the unmistakable sensation that I wasn't alone. It wasn't fear at first, just awareness. Like the moment before someone says your name. My eyes opened slowly, and I stared at the ceiling, listening. The rain was louder now, almost oppressive, but beneath it was another sound, faint and rhythmic, like wet fabric brushing against carpet. I sat up, my heart beginning to race, and scanned the room. Nothing seemed out of place. The door was locked, the windows closed. Still, the feeling persisted, heavy and deliberate, pressing against my thoughts. I told myself it was just a half-dream, the mind filling in gaps. But when I swung my legs off the couch, I felt it. Cold, damp carpet beneath my bare feet, as if someone had tracked rainwater through the room. I froze. I knew the carpet had been dry when I fell asleep. Slowly, carefully, I looked down and saw faint footprints leading away from the window, darker than the rest of the floor, elongated and uneven, like impressions left by something that didn't quite understand the shape of a human foot. I followed them with my eyes until they disappeared near the hallway. My throat tightened, and I considered calling someone, anyone. But a strange calm settled over me instead. It was the same calm I had felt years ago. Standing in the rain, watched by something I couldn't see. I stood and took a step forward. The air felt colder there, thicker, as if it resisted my movement. Each step sent a ripple of unease through my body. But I kept going, drawn by a need to understand What was happening? The hallway light flickered as I reached it, buzzing softly before stabilizing. The footprints continued, fading as they approached the bathroom door. I placed my hand on the handle and hesitated, listening. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the building. And then I heard it. A low, wet sound, like breathing through water. It was coming from inside. My fingers tightened around the handle, and before I could change my mind, I pushed the door open. The bathroom was empty. The light was on, illuminating the tile floor, and the mirror above the sink. For a moment, relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. In the mirror, just behind my reflection, I saw movement. A shadow stood where there should have been nothing. Tall and indistinct, its edges blurring and reforming like smoke trapped in water. I spun around, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. When I looked back at the mirror, the shadow remained. Closer now, its presence undeniable. It didn't have features, not really, but I could sense where its attention was focused. On me. The air grew colder and the rain seemed to grow louder, as if the storm itself were reacting. My reflection began to distort, the edges of my face wavering as though seen through rippling water. Panic finally broke through my calm. I stumbled backward, slipping on the damp tile, and the shadow in the mirror surged forward, filling the glass with darkness. I don't remember how I got out of the bathroom. I only remember collapsing against the wall in the hallway, gasping for breath, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. When I looked again, the bathroom light was off, the door slightly ajar, the footprints were gone. The carpet beneath my feet was dry. For a long time, I sat there, listening to the rain, trying to convince myself that exhaustion had played tricks on my mind. But I knew better. The feeling of being watched hadn't faded. If anything, it had intensified. After that night, the rain changed for me. It was no longer just water and sound. It was a signal. Every storm brought with it the same sensations. The cold air, the pressure in my chest, the sense of an unseen presence just beyond reach. I started noticing things during downpours, reflections that moved independently of their source, windows that fogged from the inside, whispers that threaded themselves through the sound of falling rain. I stopped sleeping during storms, choosing instead to sit awake, lights on, waiting for something to happen. One evening, as the rain fell in steady sheets, I heard a knock at my door. It was slow and deliberate, each knock separated by long pauses. I checked the peephole, but the hallway was empty. When I opened the door, there was nothing there, just the damp smell of rain drifting in from a nearby window. I closed it, heart racing, and that's when I noticed the water seeping under the door, forming a thin line across the floor. It wasn't coming from outside. It was moving inward, creeping toward me. I backed away, watching as the water spread, pooling in the center of the room. The air grew colder, and I felt that familiar gaze settle on me once more. I didn't see it, but I knew it was there, closer than ever. The rain outside reached a crescendo, and for a brief moment, everything went silent. In that silence, I heard a voice, faint but unmistakable, whispering my name. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, listening to the storm resume its relentless rhythm. Eventually, the water receded, the silence broken only by the rain. Nothing else happened that night. But I understood something then. Whatever had been following me all those years wasn't tied to a place. It was tied to me. The rain didn't create it. It revealed it. And every storm since has carried with it the knowledge that I'm never truly alone when the rain begins to fall. The fourth story is the one that still haunts me most vividly. The one that makes me hesitate before leaving the safety of indoors when the sky darkens and rain begins to fall. I had moved to a small lakeside town for work, a place where the mist rolls off the water in the evenings, and the sound of rainfall is amplified by the quiet, dense forest surrounding it. I thought I was prepared for strange experiences after everything that had happened in the past, but nothing could have prepared me for what occurred that week. It started innocuously enough. I was walking home from a late shift, the rain coming down steadily, soaking my jacket and chilling me to the bone. The streets were deserted, as most of the town's residents stayed indoors during storms, and the faint hum of water flowing through gutters was the only sound besides the occasional rumble of distant thunder. I noticed a figure standing on the bridge ahead, just barely visible in the dim light. At first, I assumed it was someone fishing or taking a late-night stroll. But something about their posture, rigid and unyielding, made me uneasy. As I approached, I realized the figure wasn't moving naturally. Its arms hung at odd angles, the head tilted slightly, and it seemed almost to float above the ground rather than stand on it. A sudden gust of wind and rain whipped around me, carrying with it a chill that felt unnatural, like the air itself had weight. The figure turned its head slowly toward me, and for a brief second, I could make out a face, or at least the suggestion of one. Featureless, smooth, but with eyes that seemed to pierce through me. Black voids reflecting nothing and everything at once. I wanted to run, to retreat back the way I had come, but my legs refused to obey. There was a compulsion, subtle yet undeniable, drawing me forward across the slick wooden planks of the bridge. The rain intensified, falling like a curtain between us, each drop a needle against my skin. I could hear nothing else. No cars, no distant voices, just the relentless patter of water. The figure remained silent, its presence oppressive, yet oddly patient, as though it had been waiting specifically for this moment. Halfway across the bridge, I stumbled slightly, my foot sliding on the wet surface. The figure reacted instantly, though it did not move in a conventional sense. Instead, the air around it seemed to shift, a pressure wave that pushed against me without touch, forcing me back onto my feet. A whisper reached my mind, clear and deliberate. though no words were formed with the lips or tongue. It was more like a thought planted there, a warning: do not turn. My heart raced uncontrollably. I didn't understand how it had communicated, but I felt the weight of its command, and even as terror surged through me, I obeyed. When I finally reached the end of the bridge, I glanced back over my shoulder, and the figure was gone. Not just absent, but erased from perception, as if it had never been there at all. The rain continued, steady and unrelenting, washing away any trace it might have left. I staggered home, drenched and trembling, trying to rationalize what I had seen. It was impossible, irrational. And yet, the memory burned in my mind with the clarity of a nightmare lived in waking life. That night, sleep was impossible. The sound of rain outside my window transformed into a chorus of whispers, taps, and footsteps. I felt the same presence I had encountered on the bridge, lingering at the edge of consciousness, patient and vigilant. Every shadow seemed to stretch unnaturally. Every gust of wind carried with it the sensation of unseen eyes tracking my movements. I realized then that the entity was no longer bound to specific locations. It existed wherever I was vulnerable, waiting for the storm to grant it access, always observing, always patient. Over the following weeks, I noticed patterns in minor details, reflections in puddles that didn't match reality, raindrops that fell in slow, deliberate sequences, the sound of a faint footstep behind me that vanished when I turned. The entity never directly attacked, but the psychological weight of its presence was enough to keep me in a constant state of tension. I found myself avoiding the outdoors during storms, checking reflections and shadows obsessively. And yet, paradoxically, drawn to the rain, despite knowing it would bring this presence back. Eventually, I began documenting these occurrences, writing each instance in a journal, noting time, location, atmospheric conditions, and emotional responses. The act of recording brought a strange comfort, creating a semblance of control. Yet it could not diminish the unease. I realized that the rain was not merely water falling from the sky. It was a conduit, a signal that something beyond comprehension used to observe, interact, and remind me that the ordinary world is only a thin veil, hiding the extraordinary. Even now, years later, whenever I hear the first soft patter of rain against my window, I pause. My mind races with the memory of those nights, of shadows that should not exist, and whispers that should not be heard. I know, deep down, that the entity is still out there, somewhere, waiting for the next storm to bridge the gap between its world and mine. The rain has taught me to respect what I cannot see, to remain vigilant, and to understand that some mysteries are eternal, patient, and ever-present. I've shared these stories not for shock or entertainment alone, but to illustrate the subtle, pervasive fear that true encounters with the unknown bring. Unlike the exaggerated horrors of movies or books, the real terror lies in the uncertainty, in the quiet moments when you feel observed and powerless, in the way the ordinary transforms into the uncanny under conditions as simple as a rainy night. Rain, I've learned, carries secrets under you, and sometimes it delivers warnings or reminders that there are forces in the world beyond understanding, ones that observe quietly, patiently, until you notice them. So, the next time rain begins to fall and you feel a shadow at the corner of your vision, a whisper carried on the wind, or a presence you cannot name, remember these stories. You might be alone, or you might be observed, and in the stillness of the storm, as water cascades down and darkness stretches endlessly, the unknown waits, patient and deliberate, reminding you that some things are better experienced than explained, and the true horror often lies not in what attacks, but in what simply watches and waits.